gentlemen, please welcome Brennan, President, Yeshiva University. Todd, Senior Principal at Norton, Executive Director, Democracy Program, Center for Justice. Please welcome Governor Andrew Cuomo.
Good afternoon. As President of Yeshiva University, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our Benjamin Cardozo School of Law for this historic occasion. We have a number of distinguished individuals here with us. It is my honor to acknowledge the presence of Senator Todd Kaminsky, of Floyd Abrams, Senior Counsel of Cale, Gordon, and Reindel, Larry Norton, Deputy Director, Democracy Program, Brennan Center for Justice, Dean Melanie Leslie, our very own Dean of Cardozo School of Law, Joanne Yu, Executive Director of the Asian American Federation, Hawk Newsom, Black Lives Matter, Beth Finkel, give an applause, you give an applause. Beth Finkel, Director of AARP New York, and from the Governor's Administration, we have Alfonso David, Counsel to the Governor, and Norma Ramos, Deputy Secretary of Civil Rights. It is first and foremost my honor to acknowledge the presence of our first speaker, Governor Andrew Cuomo. We have actually stood on the same platform at a previous occasion. About 10 years ago, I delivered the invocation for the installation as Attorney General of one Andrew Cuomo. In my invocation, I prayed for the Almighty to bestow great success upon Mr. Cuomo, and over the years, I've watched with great pleasure as God has certainly been holding up his end of the bargain and seeing how effective are my prayers. Of course, if Governor Cuomo is interested in some further mutual prayer, I am happy to accommodate. After Governor Cuomo, we'll then hear, by the way of video, from Congressman Derek Kilmer of Washington State, who is the lead sponsor of similar legislation in Washington. Then we'll have the opportunity to hearing from two leading intellectuals of our time, First Amendment lawyer Floyd Abrams and Larry Norton, and after that, we'll join Governor Cuomo for the signing of the bill. It's really a pleasure to welcome you all here to Yeshiva University. It's here that we bring together the great stores of knowledge found throughout human society with the supreme task of transforming the world of tomorrow for the better. I'm particularly proud to welcome you to our Cardozo School of Law, a school which exemplifies our core values, from caring for the vulnerable to safeguarding essential rights to wrestling actively with the cutting-edge innovations that will transform our future. I can think of no better host for this historic occasion. States are the laboratories of democracy, and it's great that New York State is leading the way on this critical issue. Thank you so much, Governor Cuomo. It is indeed my great pleasure to introduce the governor of this great state, Governor Andrew Cuomo.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. It's a great day. We're making progress. First to President Berman. I am sure he does a great job running Yeshiva University. Your enthusiasm suggests that he does. Let's give him a round of applause. But I know that when President Berman speaks, the Lord answers. That I know. So I'm going to use his counsel more often. And I thank him for swearing me in as Attorney General. It was a great position. For those of you who are learning the skills of the trade, I'm glad I'm not going through law school again, to tell you the truth. It was a long journey, but I am glad I did it. I'm advocating law school for one of my daughters now. She graduated college, and she now has to figure out what she wants to do. And I said, go to law school. And she said, well, I'm not sure that I want to practice law. I said, it doesn't matter. I said, you know, the legal education is the Swiss Army knife of life. And if you go into tech world, I said, you know, having those skills, the legal skills are important. If you go into not-for-profits, the legal skills are important. If you go into social justice, having those tools are important. Whatever you do, you go into finance, having the tools are important. And I went on, and she let me finish, and she said, there was one question. I said, what's that, honey? What's a Swiss Army knife? Communication. It is difficult. Thank you for having us here today. Let me acknowledge our guests. We have Senator Todd Kaminsky, who came down from Albany because they're in session, and he's done a heck of a job pushing this bill. And let's give the senator a round of applause. We have Floyd Abrams, who has forgotten more about free speech and the First Amendment than probably anyone else knows. He is an institution in free speech and the First Amendment, and it's an honor to be with him. Floyd Abrams. We have Larry Norton from the Brennan Center, which has been a great advocacy organization for getting democratic improvements in our system, and it's our pleasure to have him with us today. Larry. We're going to hear from Congressman Kilmer via video. They've been trying to get a law passed in Washington, and Congressman Kilmer has been at the forefront of it in the House, and Senator Klobuchar in the Senate. And let's give him a round of applause in absentia for doing what they're doing. I have my counsel, Alfonso David. Pleasure to be with him. We have Hawk Newsom, who from Black Lives Matter. Let's give him a round of applause. Hawk actually has advocated for an issue for a long time on disenfranchisement of people who go through our criminal justice system, and how hard it is to get them back into society and to re-enter society, and how expensive it is. One of the things we do, we don't allow parolees to vote in this state. At the same time that we're trying to get them to reintegrate into society, we want employers to hire them, we want them to transition from what they went through in the criminal justice system back into society, and we won't even let them vote. And all the studies show the more enfranchisement of the individual, the less recidivism. So Hawk has been advocating for a person's right to vote after coming out of the criminal justice system. And this morning I signed an executive order that allows parolees, felon parolees, the right to vote by giving them a conditional pardon. So thank you for your advocacy. And that comes back to the Swiss Army knife. We proposed a law that would allow that to happen. The legislature refused to pass it. We have a kind of stubborn Republican Senate. So we went to the Swiss Army knife, and the way we're doing this, giving the parolees the right to vote, is we're giving them a conditional pardon. So they are now pardoned, and they're no longer parolees, hence they have the right to vote. If we didn't go to law school, 35,000 people would not have the right to vote. So it's worth the 3 years that you're doing. I'm excited about today. This nation in many ways is in political crisis. When you think about how does a group of people go from President Obama and what he believes to President Trump and what he believes, and how do they make that transition in 1 year? Totally different preferences. There must be a crisis for people to be changing attitudes that quickly. And the polarization in Washington is as bad as I've ever seen. I was in Washington for 8 years during the Clinton administration. I was the Housing and Urban Development Secretary. And those were rough years. You know, impeachment is never a good thing to go through. I don't care if it's a nice impeachment. You know, it's just difficult. So I thought those were difficult, dysfunctional years. But it's nothing compared to what you're seeing now, because the political polarization is worse. You have one party that controls the executive, the Senate, and the House. So whatever they want to get done, that's basically a freight train that they're operating. The Democratic opposition can throw stones at the freight train and make their life miserable, but they're going to get that train through. And it's amazing what they're not taking up, what they're not addressing, right? You have a rash of sexual harassment against women that has been revealed that was beyond what anyone could imagine. Everybody basically had a sense that there was inequality. But to see the harassment exposed the way we've seen it, every industry, entertainment, politics, business, big shots, little shots, it's culturalized and it's institutionalized. And Washington says nothing and does nothing. You have the massacre in Florida, Parkland. Everyone's enraged about the situation with guns in this nation. And Washington does nothing, absolutely nothing. It's amazing. And it's also unfortunate because on the issue of guns, change comes at certain moments in time. The status quo is very strong, and the interests that maintain the status quo are very strong. So how do you make change? You make change when there's a window to make change, when the planets line up. The planets have lined up after Florida. You see all the activism, all the outrage. You see the people going to the streets, the young people showing more leadership than the leaders in Washington. And despite that, they do nothing. We passed the strongest gun laws in the United States of America. We did it. I had tried for years. I couldn't get it passed through the legislature because it is a very controversial topic. We have that whole upstate New York, which is very Republican and very conservative. We got those laws passed. Do you know when? Literally 1 week after the Sandy Hook massacre in Connecticut, when people were engaged and people understood and you saw the pain, and they said enough is enough. So to lose this moment is very unfortunate. And we also have a crisis in our democratic process. We have a crisis in our election system. We now know that our election system was influenced and tampered with by foreign entities. And it's not partisan rhetoric, it's not a science fiction novel. We know it. Russia was involved. Special Prosecutor Mueller indicted 13 Russians, 21 states. We have evidence were targeted by Russians for the Russians to interfere with their system. Twitter says the number of its users who may have interacted with Russian content is now at 1.4 million. Facebook alone says 126 million Americans saw Russian-funded ads. Mr. Zuckerberg testifies before the United States Congress and basically says, whoops, we missed this one, right? And admitted the exposure. And the problem is, in 8 months, we're going to have another election. And you want to talk about a partisan, heated election. I think what you see coming up in these November elections is going to be as controversial as any elections we've had, just because the fervor is so high. Can you imagine if there's a question after these midterm elections as to the integrity of the elections, what will happen in this country? Many of you are too young to remember Bush v. Gore and the aftermath of Bush v. Gore and the hanging chads, and was the vote taken or not, and people sitting there for days and weeks. and the indecision, what was a vote, what was not a vote, and then it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court had to decide, and it destabilizes the nation. Because when people think their vote may not count, or their vote has been tampered with, or they were misinformed, you're going to the heart of the entire democratic process. We right now have a toxic cocktail that has brewed. And the toxic cocktail has the explosion of social media, the anonymity of social media, the targeting ability of social media, where they can get your profile, they know your preferences, they know who you are, what you look like, what you buy, where you shop, they know your shoe size, and they can target a message just to you. And we then have the access by the foreign entities to these online platforms. Now, our First Amendment is sacrosanct. They've taught you that. The political speech is sacrosanct in this nation. They've taught you that. But none of our laws allow anonymous political speech. There is no guarantee to anonymity. The opposite is true. The campaign laws and the campaign finance laws are basically disclosure laws. Even the Supreme Court in the Citizen United case that opened the door to all the independent expenditures, which I think was an outrageous decision, but we'll leave that for another day. Citizen United case said you can spend whatever you want to spend because that's your First Amendment right to express, but you must disclose who you are and what you spent. That is the state of the law. So, how can you do all this anonymous advertising on social media? Because the law has not kept up with the technology. And the law is, frankly, totally repugnant to what's happening on social media. If you take a TV ad, you have to disclose. If you take a radio ad, you have to disclose. If I send a piece of mail to your house, I have to disclose who paid for it. Every communication has to be disclosed except social media. Why? Because when they wrote the law, there was no such thing as social media. And now it's become the dominant advertising and communication vehicle. 2/3 of Americans get their news from Facebook. 2/3 of Americans. So what possible logic would say, not on TV, not on radio, not in a newspaper, not on a piece of mail, but when it comes to Facebook, then you can say whatever you want, anyone can pay for it, and there's no disclosure whatsoever. There is no rationale. The law ultimately lies on the rationale of the facts. There is no logical rationale to exempt social media. So why doesn't Washington act? Because it's Washington, and you have the polarization that's now going on. The President of the United States doesn't want to utter the word Russia, right? If he politically never hears the word Russia again, he'll be the happiest elected official in the country. The tech companies are very, very powerful. And when you go to pass a law that takes on the tech companies, you're going up against a very formidable force. What we have done in New York is we passed a law, and I'm going to sign it in a few moments, and it will become law unless I die of a heart attack in the next 7 minutes. And our law says, very simply, in the state of New York, social media must comply with the same disclosure requirements that any other media broadcast must comply with. So it just includes the social media platforms in all the other platforms. The law also updates the definition of quote-unquote political communication to include paid internet and digital advertisement. The law requires that all online ads include a disclosure indicating who paid for the ad, even if it's just a tweet. because tweets themselves can be computer generated and paid for. The law also requires that the online platforms ensure no foreign entities are purchasing the political advertisements, and that they are using political advertisements in American elections, okay? So it puts a burden on the online companies. If you get paid in rubles, a bell should go off, right? They know who they're contracting with. They know who's paying for the ads. And they can't accept foreign ads for American campaigns in New York. Our law also requires that the New York State Board of Elections keeps copies of every ad for 5 years. So if a question arises, we can go back and look at a database. It will fundamentally change the way campaigns happen in the state of New York. There will be more disclosure, more information. When you read an ad, you'll know who paid for it, and you'll take that into consideration when you're looking at the information in that ad. And then you can find out what that entity actually represents, and then you choose whether or not to believe it, but at least you will know where it came from, who it came from, and it's not a foreign country interfering in our election. Now, you can say, that's great. That's going to be the law in the state of New York. But the other states can do what they want. You can think that. A little cynical, frankly, of you. But you're trained to be cynical, and that's what you're learning here for 3 years. Technically, yes. But look at what's going to happen now. Let's play it out. The online companies will have a choice. Do ads in the state of New York where they disclose, and run ads in other states where they don't disclose. That is an unsustainable position for them. If you're disclosing in one state, how do you justify not disclosing in the other states? The other states will demand it in a matter of moments, right? It will almost be that they are committing a fraud in the other states once New York shows they can disclose. Their other option is to say, well, we won't advertise in the state of New York. Great. Right off the state of New York, right off the market of the state of New York, which happens to be one of the largest markets. It'll be 7 seconds before one of their competitors says, oh, Facebook is moving out of New York? Well, then we'll move in and we'll disclose. Or let them try to figure out how to eliminate all the users on Facebook from the state of New York, which would open another Pandora's box. This law is going to force national change. It's going to force national change. And that has always been the role of the states, as the president said, the laboratories of democracy. States come up with ideas, states come up with reforms, they percolate up, and the federal government then assumes them. State of New York has played that role historically to a greater extent than any other state in the country. Oh, you say that because you're an arrogant New Yorker. Yes, that's why I say that. It also happens to have the advantage of being the truth. You look at every progressive movement that has started. Women's rights movement started right here in Seneca Falls, became a national movement. Environmental rights movement started right here in New York on the Hudson River when they wanted to build a power plant on Storm King Mountain, birthed the environmental movement. Workers' rights movement, worker safety rules started at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. Gay rights movement started at a demonstration at the Stonewall, and that's what actually birthed the energy for the gay rights movement. Civil rights movement, NAACP, started in New York. I became HUD secretary, went down and read the housing laws, all premised on housing laws that developed in the state of New York. There is no alternative but for the other states and the federal government to follow this path because it is smart and it is right. And once you prove that it can be done, that is the thin edge of the wedge, they say. That's where change comes and reform comes. Once you show you can do it, and they can do it, then the only question is, why wouldn't they do it? And what we're going to be saying today is we can fundamentally reform the advertising system when it comes to campaigns. And New York is doing it. Best precedent for the power of our change. We were the first large state to pass marriage equality. Marriage equality said as a matter of discrimination law, people should have a right to get married whether they're heterosexual or not. We passed the law. I called the White House the next day, and I said, the president is going to be asked this question, so you should be ready for it. Where is he on marriage equality? He said, oh, nobody's asking that question. I said, oh, they will. I signed the bill becomes law. The next day, they go to President Obama, and they said, if you were Governor Cuomo in New York, would you sign the marriage equality bill? He wasn't ready for the question. So with his beauty and eloquence, he spoke for about 4 minutes. He said nothing. They go to Joe Biden, vice president, and they said, Vice President Biden, if you were Governor Cuomo and you had the marriage equality bill on your desk, what would you do? And he said, sign it. They went back to President Obama. They said, we just talked to your vice president. And he said he would sign it. President Obama said, I would too. Then it became a question for every governor, every legislator across the country, and it took off like fire through dry grass. That's the power of New York. That's the power of leadership. That's the power of precedence. Show it can be done. Show change can be made. Show reform is possible. We don't have to be stagnant. We don't have to accept things the way they are. We can actually change things for the better and let people who are like-minded see the power of that example and let them carry it forward. That's what we're going to do with this bill. We're going to change the law in New York today, and you mark my words, we're going to change the law in this nation with this bill. Thank you, and God bless you.
Hi, I'm Congressman Derek Kilmer. Congratulations, New York, and to Governor Cuomo for taking the lead at the state level in passing the New York State Democracy Protection Act. By signing this bill, Governor Cuomo and New York's leaders will be shining a light on the murky world of political advertising. New York's and Governor Cuomo's leadership on this issue sets an example that I hope Congress follows, because every American deserves to know who's trying to influence our elections. Disclosure rules like the one you're signing today are a no-brainer. They protect the voice of the people. They provide an important check on foreign actors like Russia. And they limit the influence deep-pocketed special interest groups play in the democratic process. It's time for Congress to follow New York's lead and pass the federal policy that inspired this bill, the Honest Ads Act. The Honest Ads Act has bipartisan support in the United States Senate and the House. I introduced it in the House with Representative Mike Kaufman, a Republican from Colorado. In the Senate, Senators Mark Warner, Amy Klobuchar, and John McCain are leading the way. So thank you, New York, and Governor Cuomo for getting this done. I hope this is the first of many steps at the state and federal levels to cast a light on the campaign finance process. And I hope steps like today start to restore the faith that too many people have lost in our democratic process. Let's keep moving forward.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Governor Cuomo, for the chance to join you. And thank you in particular for that extraordinary speech that you have just given us. We are all honored to be here today and to have heard you and to be a part of this state which has, as you've said, so often moved before anyone else did, and as you have advocated. I've been in the business, as it were, for, you could say, the last half century of seeking to protect political speech and the First Amendment right to express one's views, particularly about government, social policy, cultural issues, and the like. This bill, this legislation, as it is about to be, protects all of that. It does not limit speech. It does not in any way limit First Amendment rights. But it's more than that. It is pro-First Amendment. What it does is to allow the public to find out who's speaking, who's paying for speech, and where the speech comes from. That is something which is not only consistent with the First Amendment, it's at the heart of the First Amendment. And it is time, for all the reasons that Governor Cuomo has set forth, indeed past time, to apply to digital entities, social media platforms, and the like, the same rules that we have for other means of communication. So I applaud Governor Cuomo for his leadership, for taking action, for taking us forward in protecting our political system, our democratic system, and the First Amendment. And I'm very glad to be here. So now please join me in welcoming Larry Norton, the Deputy Director of the Brennan Center's Democracy Program.
Thank you, Floyd. And thank you, Governor Cuomo, for inviting me to be here today as you sign a bill that will help protect our democracy from foreign interference. As the governor said, there's really no room for doubt that the Russian government meddled in the 2016 election, and they will surely be back. The Kremlin's activity represents a threat not just to our national security, but to our sovereignty as a nation. The American people have the right to decide the course of action that their government takes. We must act to defend ourselves, and unfortunately, despite the very good efforts of Congressman Kilmer and his colleagues in the Senate, Washington is not doing enough. That's why it's vital that states like New York step forward to protect our citizens, to protect our democracy, and that's what Governor Cuomo is doing here today. This is a crucial bill that, as Governor Cuomo said, will have implications far beyond New York, and in fact, it's already having that impact, that fire that Governor Cuomo spoke of. Just since the bill was introduced, we've seen other states follow New York's lead. In fact, last week, the legislature in Maryland passed a very similar bill to what the governor is about to sign. The Speaker of the House in California introduced a bill with the same provisions, and at the Brennan Center where I work, we're getting calls from state officials around the country asking how they can do the same. So the governor is quite right that New York is a leader here, and it's really going to have a huge impact on our elections. And the tech companies will have to respond. States like New York can force companies like Facebook and Twitter and Google to create an infrastructure that can be applied nationwide to regulate political spending on the internet and to allow us to spot the same kind of stealth and illegal activity that happened in 2016. We need to do everything that we can to make sure that our next elections are free and fair and accountable, and all of us who study American democracy are looking to this effort. We're very proud that New York has taken the lead to protect the integrity of our elections. And so on behalf of the Brennan Center and the people of New York, Governor, I thank you, and let's sign the bill.
Well done. Thank you. How many pens does it take to sign your name when you're the governor? Congratulations, the bill is signed.